Hello, friends. My name is Erin Hawkins, and I'm the General Secretary of the General Commission on Religion and Race. I want to welcome you to the fourth installment in the Vital Conversation series, Race, Culture, the Church, and Human Sexuality. Given the current discussion in the United Methodist Church around the ordination and marriage of gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, and queer persons, we offer this resource for your discernment. There are those who question why G-Corps is involved in the conversation about human sexuality. To this we say, as the agency responsible for lifting up the voices of those historically marginalized, we believe that any discussion about the future of this denomination must include those voices. We encourage you to watch these videos and to discuss them with those in your church and community, as together we discern a way forward.
I'm Debbie Weatherspoon. I'm a United Methodist elder currently serving an interim appointment at United Campus Christian Ministry at Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. I've been in pastoral ministry for 20 years and am married to a United Methodist clergy person and have 2 sons.
My name's Ananda Barclay, and I am a Presbyterian Church USA pastor at First Presbyterian Church Palo Alto and the interim campus minister for UCCM, which is United Campus Christian Ministry for students at Stanford University.
So at our campus ministry at Stanford, we've been really struggling with working with students, meeting them where they are, what their connection is, identity. But sometimes I've experienced that they're kind of turned off by the church and feel like that's cool that you want to connect with us and maybe talk about our spiritual life and where we're struggling, but I'm not sure about church.
I think we run into that all the time. To me, it feels as though students don't have feel like there's room for them in the church.
I don't really find that students consider the church necessarily a progressive voice for them or connected. So I was just thinking about that in terms of, I know my own denomination, and maybe your experience is a little different as Presbyterian, but we've really struggled with being an inclusive church.
Yeah, I feel it's something we really, really struggle with institutionally as Protestant denominations, as the Western Church. But the institutions were not designed, right, for queer people, LGBTQ people in mind. They weren't designed for as many, if, to be honest with you, really people of color in mind as equal. And so when you have institutions that operate out of a framework that doesn't exist in reality, of course we have problems. And so what do we do with this institution that now wants to be inclusive and meet students where they are, but the institution itself isn't set up to meet students where they are?
Well, and mine is currently straight out exclusive. And so if there is even a shift in my denomination to become inclusive, that might just be on paper. How do you make it intentional? How do you get off of just being what your statement is on paper?
It requires relationality and a shift in cultural and social change, right? You have to love your neighbor as yourself, which means you have to get to know your neighbor second to a certain degree. You really have to get to know yourself and work through your stuff.
How do we talk about that in terms of being more relevant and connecting with people? And helping people who are in charge, who are designing things, to say, this needs to be more organic and more emerging. And
it really does boil down to meeting people where they are. And I stress working through our stuff because it's our barriers, right? And when we try to add people into a system that wasn't created for them, they really are an addendum. So it's checking off a diversity box. Oh, you're a woman, you're a person of color. Use myself, for example. A woman, person of color, queer, check, check, check. But the same systems of either oppression or subjugation or marginalization still exist, right? You just checked a box, but you didn't change the culture. Did you change how you pay people? Do you change how you understand how frameworks such as white supremacy, heterosexism, sexism operate, right? If none of those things change, then you didn't change anything. You just added an addendum. But to add somebody changes the entire culture, the entire organism, life of the
How does
organization.
the change happen? I often wonder, as with heterosexual privilege,
Yeah.
if I need to be confessional, do I turn, even if the language changes in my denomination,
Right.
I've been wondering, how do we make reparations? How do we confess and say, I'm sorry, I excluded you? Did you go through the Presbyterian Church before the language changed?
So I went through the Presbyterian Church right as it was changing. So the very year our General Assembly approved LGBTQ folks getting ordained, that fall I was in seminary.
How have you felt welcomed and included? And when have you not?
So when churches say I'm welcoming and inclusive, I'm assuming LGBTQ, I'm not assuming people of color, just because of the cultural context of my denomination. It's predominantly white. So I'm assuming aware of LGBTQ issues, but not necessarily maybe POC issues, right? Let alone the combination thereof, because we all have a multiplicity of identities, and we just see each other as one identity or two identity and not hold the complexity of our being. It's incredibly problematic. I would argue it's sinful, right? If sin is separation of our truest selves, our divinity, then and to live in a sinful state is it's hellish, right?
I think that's why I've wondered the sin part about confession, and we have had the conversation as a denomination around reparations, toward where we segregated because of color of skin or toward Native Americans, and I wonder, will there be a time where there'll be such a thing toward the queer community, where we would say, and has that happened in the Presbyterian Church? How do they make it right when they were exclusive before?
Yeah, I think that's still very much in conversation, because there's several folks who want, a language officially given by the Office of the General Assembly saying.
Like what?
That,
like what kind of language?
or a statement. A statement apologizing. I would like an apology, but to me, personally, I would want that embodied.
Right.
So
you don't need more words.
I need words to a certain degree are cheap.
Right.
I want you to show me. And I think when we talk about including people, that means that people have been excluded or deemed unequal or subhuman, really, in some sort of way. And so when you have an act of dehumanization, of course an apology is needed, but what's most needed is not simply inclusion, but really a transformation.
People often say baby steps, but then other people will say, how long, and how do you live in it? How do you stay strong in it? And I'm always encouraged by your strength and your willingness to be authentic and work through process. And I'm grateful that your experience when you did this with more light is like reconciling in our denomination. And once the language changed and you're more accepting in your denomination, do people still understand the need?
So we had to do a self-assessment. So it's that loving your neighbor as yourself, that inside work that then reflexively also shows itself in the outer world. And we sat down as a board and said, do we need to exist? Are we ministering to our hopes and dreams that are just ours, or are there actually people out there who need us? And what we realized is we kept getting calls and requests, not so much, of course, for polity, but what we're realizing is from individual parishes, right, or certain presbyteries or campus groups, of how they kept coming to us for culture, really culture and social change. How do we actually enact that which we believe?
Congregation I served, I was the first woman to serve there, and this was 1997, and it was in Miami area of Florida, so people kind of thought things would be a little bit more progressive. But I remember about maybe 3 months in calling our Commission on Status and Role of Women and saying, do you have something for your pastor's a woman, get over it? Like some support, like some kind of handbook, like training or something, because just you put a person into a call or appointment and they're the first, whatever, fill in the blank, or cross-racial, cross-cultural appointment, you have to do some training there.
Institutions right now in general have not caught up to the reality of what is, because they're not built to be fluid in the same way. And so it causes a gridlock, which in the church is costly, because it's
Yes.
a spiritual gridlock
Right.
that you're causing too. When we say inclusive, when we say progressive, liberal, conservative, we have to put it on a spectrum. I think people assume that whatever they say or what they believe, the other person has the exact same definition, which isn't true. I think everybody has different definitions, and within your cultural context. We all have a multiplicity of identities, that which we give ourselves and those identities that are put onto us.
When I served that church, being the first woman, I was just out of seminary, and people mostly see me as white, or they'll see me as Latina, because my father was from Mexico. They were a little concerned that I was a woman. Well, okay, they didn't want me. But at the same time, Ellen DeGeneres came out, and they actually said, well, at least you're not gay.
That's a thing.
And then I was dating an African-American man, and then who's now my husband for 20 years, but when he came to communion, it was like, guess who's coming to the Lord's Supper, you know? It was really a lot for this congregation, so I can't even imagine
one package.
Right, you know, what your struggle is and how exhausting that can be.
Oh, it's totally exhausting. But I think that's why self-care is important as we do this work of, again, I hate saying inclusion because now it's a buzzword, because to me it goes with that addendum. But as we do transformative, actual, spiritual work, holistic spiritual work, self-care is center. So I have to know myself well enough to know when to tap out, which is something I'm still working on. I got blessed enough to live a little bit out of Palo Alto, in the middle of the woods. So that's self-care. Spiritual practice of prayer. Huge. Community to pray and meditate with. Huge. Great working relationship is part of self-care. Huge.
Right.
There's a cost to doing work of trying to change systems, right?
And it's for the long haul, just like just so you just change a few things. And
it takes all of us at all of our levels. There is no, you young people, just wait. Young people are doing stuff now, right? And we need our older folks to pass the torch and show us the way. It takes different levels of loving in order to get the work done. And it's sacred work. Loving people is not easy. We kind of paint it as flowers, and it's not easy, but it's always worth it.
Yeah.
True love, it's always worth it. Yeah.